Well, if you're out of the loop, ArenaNet just spent the last month building up to a large announcement of some kind where we were, as the community, were expecting lots of details to be released about the future of the game. We obviously knew Living World was coming out, and we knew since April 2nd a rough roadmap of various features, like the build templates were on the table, that Swiss was something that they were looking into, that World versus World restructuring is something they're looking at. We had these facts since April 2nd, but ever since the most recent Living World season concluded with Dragonfall, which was an excellent release, we've been wondering what's going on. Why isn't the game in an expansion right now? When is the next expansion? When do we get new elite specializations? And of the stuff on the roadmap, what exactly can ArenaNet tell us about how that stuff will be implemented? Never fear, today there was a big announcement that would answer all that stuff. Well, I gotta say, the announcement really hasn't done well on this one. The devs seriously missed the mark and didn't give a lot of the information that we really need. I've actually come out of this announcement feeling pretty bad about Guild Wars and what they're planning for the next couple of years, mostly because one of the most important facts wasn't discussed, and that's, are there going to be expansions? How far does this go? Is it Living World forever? So, there's a huge amount to talk about. I'm going to give you guys a moment-by-moment breakdown of the new information we got. And there were some great moments from this release, undoubtedly. In fact, I've already done a video on the trailer for the new Living World episode that I really recommend you guys check out, because as far as the story is actually concerned, as far as the work is going into Living World story patches, it seems we're on smooth sailing. The game's been like that ever since Season 3 started, really. If that's what you like about the game, then they really do seem to have us covered, and I've got a lot of things to be excited about. I'll even give you extra information that wasn't in the trailer because of the production here. But there are some serious questions we're going to have to ask ourselves about why ArenaNet put on a 40-minute show with so much hype, a 48-hour cooldown rolling in timeline rolling into it for everybody to watch, and you know, a month's build-up, to then pretty much give us information that could have been in a blog post. So, let's try and be objective, see what we got. So, the show started off, first of all, with just some fluffy community interviews. A guy from the wiki was there. I have massive respect for people who use the Guild Wars 2 wiki and update it. So, that was nice to see. We saw some cosplayers, somebody dressing up as a Choya. I actually do enjoy, as much as a curmudgeon as I am, I enjoy seeing people cosplay contemporary stuff. Like Choya or Path of Fire, right? You don't see people really cosplaying a lot of the newer things. And, you know, just a couple of interviews, but no real details. Finally, the show itself begins. And we kind of begin with a section with Mike Z. So Mike Z is the current game director. He gets on stage and he gives us some basic information about where the game has been. They actually do a kind of a cool montage showing off a lot of the stuff that came in the most recent year, with the 2 new festival stuff that they were doing, with the roller beetle update that came in, with a lot of the highlights of the story, like Kralkatorrik falling out of the mists, and looking at Ascended Aurene, and all these things that just get you into the moment and remember just how much cool stuff did come last year. So they try and set the stage with that. Then he talks about pretty much some of the April 2nd stuff that we already knew. So he mentions that Swiss is going to be coming for automated tournaments for PvP, but leaves it there. He talks about how World vs. World's next major focus is landing world restructuring. That's pretty much what he said word for word, but he leaves it there, and that's really not much news. And then he goes on to build templates. So, build templates, we do get a little bit of new information, as opposed to the PvP and World vs. World things, which they didn't really say anything. I think the suggestion with PvP, by the way, was that testing for Swiss is going to be happening really soon, but they never gave us an actual time, so it's kind of no news. When it comes to build templates, we do get something tangible, though. Back on April 2nd, we just heard that they were really doing it, and that was exciting in its own way. But now, here's what he says. That character builds and gear templates are coming to Guild Wars 2 in the near future. That's what he says. So we kind of think of it as just one thing that we're all waiting on. But the way that Mike Z phrased it for the presentation makes it sound like there actually be 2 separate systems. One is to do with presumably your selected skills, maybe your selected weapons possibly, but obviously your specialization lines and selections with them. And then the other half is going to be gear templates. There'll actually be 2 separate things. If you remember in Guild Wars 1, they kind of functioned as 2 separate things as well, and that they'll be coming. Also, I find this really interesting. His exact words were about legendary runes and sigils. So he's talking about legendary runes and sigils, which came very recently and were a nice update for the game. And he says exactly this. He says, this leads to perhaps our biggest quality of life improvement for these dedicated fans. Character builds and geared templates. Now, I don't know whether it's just because the presentation whizzed through very quickly for most people, but to me, that doesn't sound that great. That sounds to me like it might be very much hooked in to legendary upgrades, and that a lot of the build template stuff might only really flourish when you're using legendary upgrades. That's just kind of the way it was phrased. You'd think they'd be very careful about the way that they phrased this, since this was a proper show in a theater that they'd rented out and so on. But, hey, I'm wondering what you guys think there. That's pretty much all we got on build templates. There was no date for it, which is what I think where people were hoping. Just as people were hoping for the Wild vs. Wild and PvP stuff. We did get a little bit of footage, but it wasn't that interesting. It was a character walking on a road, and they were executing the level up animation, or the hero point acquisition animation, where they just raise their hand in the sky. Their armor or anything wasn't changing, but if you look very closely at that footage, you'll notice the weapon that they're holding in the hand is swapping. So clearly the devs have got something going on, but there was no user interface. Like, I think I was at least hoping to see some UI work. Like, this stuff seems very, very work in progress. Now remember, the studio did have big layoffs in this year, and they're probably scrambling to catch up. But it almost feels to me like none of the stuff they've mentioned so far actually justified doing a big announcement for, really, because they just don't have anything tangible to show us. They have a character whose weapon is swapping that they could have easily spoofed, to be honest, by just filming a third person, and they were just quickly mousing through their inventory. So, not that impressive. Even they could have ran, like, Arc, right? The Arc build template thing, and had you swapping armor sets on that, and it could have looked a little bit better. So, just kind of nothing there, really. Moving on, Z then does talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's upcoming and the races that we've been dealing with. They show some concept art across the entire stream, in fact, but a lot of the concept art is old concept art that we've already seen. It's like release Guild Wars 2 concept art, or it's concept art from Guild Wars 1 even. A lot of the story announcements are to do with the Far Shiver Peaks and to do with the Blood Legion homelands, which we will be getting. That's exciting, don't get me wrong. But we're looking at like Guild Wars 1 concept art. It doesn't even seem like they've got that much that they could put onto this stream to show us, you know, this new body of work that they've done for this new season. So then we start to hear something interesting. Now, this is some of the most tangible stuff that came out of the event. We hear the phrase saga, okay? We hear that there's going to be a new saga coming to Guild Wars 2, starting with a prologue release called Bound by Blood on the 17th. Okay, so what this presentation is giving us is that in a matter of days, not very far away, there is new content coming to the game. That new content, as I'm about to show you guys, is a new map. We will be playing new stuff. There'll be new story, achievements, stuff to get. And it's not very far away. It's on the 17th of the month, okay? It's called Bound by Blood. But instead of it being a fully fledged Living World episode, like you would have expected, you know, the entire Isles of Istan with the meta and, you know, races and all that kind of stuff from last season, this is going to be a mini episode, not even a full one, that they're calling a prologue as an entrance. And instead of it being a season, they're calling it a saga. So some other devs will get on stream and justify that in a second. So in the principle of going chronologically with this event, I'll just gloss over that for now. But yes, the episode is called Bound by Blood. I'm pretty sure that's going to be somehow referential towards the Eye of the North mission. Blood washes blood. Any Guild Wars 1 fans out there will remember in that region of the world we did a mission called Blood washes blood. Very much to do with Jorah and the Nornbear Svanir, which I think are going to be big topics going forward since we're into a Jormag expansion. So that's what Z reveals there. And finally, Z talks a little bit about Heart of Thorns. So Guild Wars is in a place where they're going to be releasing this new Living World season. And they've got all these tools. They've got bouncing mushrooms, they've got gliding from one expansion, and then they've got mounts and stuff from the other expansion. In the spirit of keeping everyone together and not creating too many barriers and limits, they've now made Heart of Thorns free. The original expansion, Heart of Thorns, is free if you're buying Path of Fire. So now the business model has changed a little bit. You have core Guild Wars 2, right, from the free-to-play accounts. And if you spend money on an expansion, on POF, you get both expansions at once, okay? So it's now 30 quid for everything, for all the masteries, for access to all the stuff. And then, you know, you'll play, you'll get gold and gems to unlock the episodes and so on. So that's pretty insane value. I think under most other circumstances, if the community wasn't so starved and hungry for information on other things, that would be a big takeaway from this presentation, but not many people are really talking about it. It does mean that it's a good entry point for new players, and I think the devs are really interested in getting new players in. They should be, right? Because that's the lifeblood of the game, to make sure that it sustains numbers. They talk about trying to get new players in. They talk about this saga, this new principle, as being something that should be a moment for new people to get in. And, well, they've done that with the business model there. I think also, if you remember, when Heart of Thorns came out and they made the core game free, people backlashed. They said, oh, you're not treating me properly as a veteran player. There was that huge non-controversy all those years ago. You guys remember that? I think ArenaNet are scared of a similar controversy. And so immediately they've made Heart of Thorns free. But they've also said, if you already have Heart of Thorns, here we're going to give you a bunch of free goodies. So there's like a free glider you'll get. And there's, you know, skins and things. You're going to be getting mails. In fact, I'm in game right now, obviously. Here, look, I have a special item. Now that I have Heart of Thorns, I get free stuff. So, you know, people can enjoy that. And again, if you really care about the in-game side of Guild Wars 2 and unlocking the skins and all that, then hopefully you'll feel valued as a veteran player. Then the presentation quickly moves on. And for all the stuff that people have whined about with this presentation and felt bad about with this presentation, myself included, I don't really think this is on the list. So there you go. That's the bit with Mike Z. That's kind of the opener. Or I say opener. It's a good chunk of the presentation. We're already through here. He got through it very well. He's obviously not public speaking that much. Had a bit of a runny nose toward the end, but got through, and he was able to escape right before it's too bad. And then we move on to the next section. The trailer representing Jormag has been played by this point, and we've got the hints, you know, maybe about the deep sea dragon and all that stuff that I've done my analysis on that other video that I really recommend you guys check out. So for section 2, we start having interviews, kind of like half interviews with some devs. So first of all, we get 2 story writers come on, and therefore you can't really expect them to talk much about anything other than story here, because they've dedicated a whole section to that. You know, this is a living world announcement, all right? After all, they did telegraph that quite clearly. I know a lot of us were looking for more, but here you go. So this is what the writers have to say, and as a lore geek, I was pretty interested in a lot of this. First of all, this next saga, which they will justify in a moment, so bear with me. This next saga is going to be a new kind of dragon story centered on the Char and on the Norn. So basically, they're looking at what is the status quo for Tyria right now that Kralkatorrik's been defeated. What kind of situation we're in. Not only is the player base wondering that, not only would the inhabitants of Tyria be wondering that, they actually suggest that even Jormag is now wondering that and maybe wants a bigger slice of the pie or something. So that's kind of a big thing there. They gloss very much over how Jormag woke up. If you actually remember, the established idea in the story right now, just before all this starts, is that Jormag is asleep. He was put to sleep by us and the machine in the Balthazar conflict way back with the Flashpoint release. So he's been asleep since then. That's why Bran was not able to rally the Norn to take him out. So what woke Jormag up? I'm pretty sure this will be something the story has to deal with. It's kind of weird because at one point some of the lore devs seemed to suggest that Bran had this big epic failure and climactic battle against Jormag, but that wasn't and it all happened off screen. That wasn't my impression of it. My impression of it was he'd attempted, but it fell asleep, so they just all sort of thought, well, whatever. Honestly, it's a weird part of the storytelling that here in this section, the writers do basically say, look, we will be looking at that. We'll be following Bran as he struggles with, you know, his, so to speak, failure there. He was the one that broke the tooth, and these stories are now going to become relevant. What's also interesting is they do mention a little bit about the deep sea dragon. They mention that the deep sea dragon is kind of around, but they don't say much more. I think from the trailer that the deep sea dragon will have relevance this season, and I guess we're just going to have to say the devs are pretty tight-lipped about it. They also say something fairly interesting about the idea that this is a Norn and Char saga and centric story. They say that they felt Heart of Thorns was quite Sylvari-oriented, and that Path of Fire was quite human-oriented. So now they wanted to do a Char and Norn one, kind of together. Maybe it's a little bit unfair that those two races kind of got bundled together in that way. But what I find interesting is if that's the way that ArenaNet's operating, that's all of the player races done except Asura. So I have to assume at the studio, they're thinking long-term at least enough that they want to do a Char and Norn story here, and they want to finish on an Asura-centric story. They want to end on an Asuran kind of thing. Now, that makes perfect sense to me, because if they end on an Asura thing, the dragon most typically associated with the Asura is Primordus. Primordus, the first that we met, that would be a brilliant way to bookend the game. You know, a final saga or season or expansion, whatever they want to do, but dealing with the Asura and Primordus and the depths and the dwarves and stuff. It would feel very Eye of the Northy, and I don't know, I like that idea. So maybe reading between the lines, we can see some long-term plans from the devs in that little section there, but that's kind of their idea. So they do actually show off some footage at this moment, by the way. I'll hopefully roll some of it for you guys on the video here. This is showing the new map. So as you can see, it actually looks just like the Char homelands from Guild Wars 1. I'm actually amazed at how similar it looks. It almost looks like the game engine hasn't like developed technically that much, right? So I'm really eyeballing this very closely. The Blood Legion homelands, now confirmed to be coming in a Living World season, means it's not coming in an expansion. That's a point of disappointment for me. That's a thing that I thought, look, I'd really like to see the Blood Legion homelands done for an expac so they can go big with it. Like, look at where I'm exploring right now. Look at how gorgeous and incredible and rich and lush with new assets the Path of Fire stuff was. I wanted this kind of treatment for a place that I felt very special about, and that was the Blood Legion homelands. Now we're getting into Living World season, and this footage you're watching right here, this footage is what you're going to get. So have they gone far enough with the new assets? I guess that's up for you guys to decide. I'm still very nervous that it won't feel like a fresh enough, awesome new coat of paint. We also get some glimpses of some of the mountains. And, you know, it feels like core established, vanilla-y kind of Guild Wars 2 stuff. And I'm just scared that it won't go far enough. But the footage looks okay. It's something I'm nostalgic about. I swear that view, one of those views on that, some of that footage there, is just like what it looked like leaving from Long Eyes Ledge in Guild Wars 1. And they kind of rolled a bit of that through as they were talking about things. So, then they go on to talk a little bit more about exactly what this prologue is going to be, this thing on the 17th. So they mention it's kind of a celebration. Tonally, it's going to be very different to the rest of the saga, in that it's quite light, it's people celebrating that Kralkatorrik's gone, and especially, it seems, the Char's reaction to the fact that Kralkatorrik is gone. Because the Char has been a major thorn, at least in the Iron Legion side, right? So Kralkatorrik's gone, the Char become very interested, and they say that it's all about the Char and the Blood Legion bringing the High Legions to them for a massive rally, okay? So we go immediately up there for some kind of big party, it seems. They say even the Flame Legion will be there. Even the Flame Legion will be invited to whatever these celebrations are, or will feature in this prologue patch, okay? So, it's a patch where we'll go to the Blood Legion homelands, we'll get to explore. I would anticipate not too much, since they're just calling it a prologue. But they'll be wondering and tackling questions like, what is the death of Kralkatorrik meant for Char society? Which I think is really important for the devs to do. They make out that Ritlock will have some interesting stuff, and it sounds like, you guys remember the short stories they did, the Requiem short stories, and I wasn't too hot on a lot of those. The Char one, the Ritlock one that demonstrated he had cubs and so on. It sounds like that's going to be really important for the next season, and some of the stuff that was established there, you really ought to know. So maybe go read that story, or again, I have a video on that you can watch at the end of this one here. So it sounds like they're going to lean on that. They also seem to be asking a lot of the right questions. Like, one of the devs specifically said this, that some of the subject material coming up will be asking if the treaties that brought everyone together are actually still valid. Now, this is great to me. So remember, everyone's all happy, holding hands, they're all lovey-dovey, right? Char and human treaty and so on. But a lot of that was spurred by the threat of the Elder Dragons. You know, the Char have all these battles on all the front. Well, the Flame Legion are kind of eliminated to an extent here, based on the vanilla story to a certain extent. Kralkatorrik is a huge thorn gone. The push of the Ogres isn't necessarily such a big deal anymore either. So, is the treaty relevant? The treaty is one of those, like, lingering stories almost frozen in time, right? From the tent. And what I'd like to see now is Living World look at it, and it seems like that's exactly what they're going to do. So I was impressed by the story stuff in this section of the stream. I think they were asking all the right stuff, and I'm excited to see where they go with it. I hope that they don't just fob off the answer to these questions as, oh, the treaty's fine, we'll leave it. I hope we actually go in interesting directions and the devs play with it properly, right? But there you go. So now something kind of cool happens. We're still talking to the lore devs, but they got asked, what the hell is a saga? So this is the main takeaway of the whole presentation, guys. This is probably the main takeaway of my whole video and what we're going to spend most of the time discussing. A saga is their new vision for Living World seasons. We're not going to have a Season 5. There's no such thing, to an extent, right? Season 4 was the last Living World season. After this, it's going to be Living World sagas. So here's what the devs say, and they throw a lot of words out. They say that now they have 4 content teams. They have wiggle room in what the idea of a content release is. So currently, a content release is a big thing with a story journal update and maps and all that kind of stuff going on. Well, now they have 4 teams and they're expanding on the idea of what a release is. Releases might be looking at existing content. They might be a story-focused episode. They might be about a totally new element of the game. Okay, I don't know what concepts they've got for new elements of the game, but imagine a whole release purely around fishing, right, or something, I don't know, or a new race, right? That would be a new element of the game, I guess. They say a new type of content that I haven't tried before. They say that because of sagas and that they're mixing up what a release can be, they're hoping to slip some surprises in. Now, of course, this is all just kind of marketing, intangible. What does that mean? But they did say that. They said they're going to try and slip some surprises in. And my initial response to this, as we got some sense of this back in April 2nd. In April 2nd, they kind of said they were going to do this, right? And I've remembered and I've implored people to focus on that. My sense of this is that it's too hard for ArenaNet to have every single release be this massive laundry list of stuff. And if they fail to get the laundry list of stuff in, they get criticism. So my impression is that they can't keep up, so they're rebranding the whole thing to escape. Therefore, what we will get, my cynical heart tells me, is that we will get less. Maybe more regular releases, but overall a bit less. That's what I'm thinking this is all about. However, on the presentation, and I'm sure the devs know that people like me are thinking this, on the presentation, they do specifically say that it's called a saga because it's bigger than a season. And they say it's fluid and it's flexible. That's the idea. So, I guess you guys will have to wonder how cynical you are on this or how you're not. I do think that there's some very clear differences in the competencies of the content teams. Some of those guys are amazing, and the releases you see they put out are incredible. So many of the drops that we saw in this most recent season for Season 4 are way better than people give credit for. But then you have one that sticks out like a sore thumb and was clearly a bit crunched, right? Like we had with Long Live the Lich and the, kind of wonky meta, and it didn't have that many new profound things going on. So if there's differences in the scale of tasks that the different teams can do due to developer competency differences or inspiration or whatever, maybe, making it looser is a good idea. Maybe they do have more freedom to pursue totally exciting stuff. But is it expansion caliber stuff? Is it elite specialization level stuff? Is it called a saga because we'll get elite specs in the middle of it now? Well, that I'd be on board for. But the devs never said. Is it called a saga because we can get new races? The devs never said. Is it called a saga because we're going to get not just extra mounts, but entirely new concepts, like the mount concept was introduced with Path of Fire, or the Mastery concept was introduced with Heart of Thorns? Are we going to get really big, exciting new stuff? Well, we don't know. All we have is a line that they're going to slip surprises in. So this is really what everything hinges on. This presentation did not talk about a new expansion, ever, at any point. You would have thought if the devs had any plan for it, they would have assured the player base that one's coming. You would have thought they would have, but they didn't. I think that they're not planning a new expansion from this presentation. I think that they're too scared to announce that. So instead they're pushing this saga idea, but they didn't do enough to sell the saga idea. And so now we're left in a really weird place. There are some positives to sagas, I think, by the way. I think that Living World is really unfairly viewed by veteran players. I think that people formed opinions about what seasons are, how long they take to complete episodes and stuff, back in Living World Season 1 and Season 2, when they were very short and they were very constrained. And I think people developed play habits that are not great back in Season 1 and Season 2. Like, they were taught during those seasons that the only value is doing the story journal and leaving. And so there's this weird, horrible impression that a season episode only takes 2 hours and that's it. It's 2 hours of content every 3 months. That's completely ridiculous. It's just that most players haven't learned to care about the achievement. They're not incentivized to really look at the full extent of these patches and just how massive they are, and to really appreciate the scale of the things that the devs are sometimes doing, like with episode 2 adding elevators and boats and all the gravity physics and things like that, and genuinely interesting large story. People just kind of zerg through, they treat it like a speed run, and then they complain. That's what the average Guild Wars 2 player has been conditioned to do. Speed run through a season episode and ignore everything else. And that's why seasons have this reputation of being these very short things that I think is very, very misjudged by players. So by rebranding to Sagas, it's kind of like the devs can... Because a lot of this is semantics. People think very shallowly about games. This is kind of an opportunity to reconfigure the way people are consuming the content and talk about it differently if they really push this new brand properly, this Saga brand. So I say all of that, but then baked into the very concept of a saga is the notion that a lot of it will be more piecemeal, right? That's just basically what it sounds like it's going to be. Sometimes a saga release won't be a new map. It won't even be story journal updates. It will just be like an expansion to Queensdale that talks about the centaurs a bit or something, right? So I'm not sure. Another way that you might be able to look at sagas, and this is what I'm thinking, is over the past 3 years, the devs have been flirting with this category of achievements, side stories. Remember all these? And some of these were pretty good. You know, the conservation of magic was like a side, an actual quest chain. We had kind of an epilogue for Heart of Thorns in here. We had some good features, and we've got some, you know, odd, different, random, sporadic bits of content that we don't quite know how they fit in with everything else. I think the idea of a saga is the idea of the story journal combined with the side stories. And so you can actually have these smaller side story type things that are still building up. In a minute on the presentation, a couple of different devs will come on, and they're going to talk about episode 1 of this saga and episode 2 of this saga being very dynamic in the way that they grow in and out of one another. And I think that that's another side of this. I think we're going to see some more Season 2 style stuff, like with Drytop, where it was one map that continued expanding. But the way that it expands might be done a little bit more organically in this upcoming saga. But again, this is all reading between the lines. Anyway, so that's what it's all about with Guild Wars now. It's about sagas. And for the foreseeable future, I don't know. You would have thought that ArenaNet would say, yeah, also 2021, we're going to Cantha or something like that. I think they believe if they can get away with sagas for good, then they will do sagas for good. And there's all kinds of business reasons why that might be true that we can speculate on, but I'll keep going chronologically throughout the talk so far. So there you go. That's the idea of the saga, and we get the 2 new developers on. So when these guys come on, they're gameplay devs. Someone randomly boos them. I have no idea why. Maybe a bit of a repeat of the dude in the audience for the Heart of Thorns event that went so badly. But they talk a little bit about ascended cooking at the start, and maybe there was a suggestion there that we might see new foods come in over time. But then we start rolling some footage. So this is the Grothmar Valley. This is apparently the Prologue Map. And you'll see it's a portmanteau of 2 maps in Guild Wars 1. You had the Sacknoth Valley in the Char Homelands in Guild Wars 1. And you had the Grothmar Wall Downs. And I think that this is the 2 of them combined together. And we're going to be able to play around here. Another bit of footage later showed like a rock concert earlier for these celebrations because of Kralkatorik's defeat. In the footage, you can see some new kinds of effigies. Again, I just scrutinize this. I look at it very closely. Are these new assets worthy? Are they good expansion replacement level stuff, quality stuff? That's what I really think about as I look at this. And you guys can have your own answer there. So they say that the prologue, we're going to be in the Char Homelands for the Grothmar Valley. But episode 1 and 2, they say we're going to the far Shiver Peaks, the furthest north Guild Wars 2 has ever taken us. So currently the furthest north is the Bastion, but it's very closely tied with the Eye of the North, which is like here. We'll be going further up. So I'm wondering if on episode 1 and 2, when all is said and done, if we'll actually have the whole story of Guild Wars 1's terrain covered, whether we'll go all the way to the very north where that giant hole was. But they didn't really give us a name or anything like that, just that there'll be a lot of Far Shiver Peak stuff as soon as the saga itself gets rolling. They talk about Masteries. So Masteries for the past season have been about mounts. They've been about augmenting existing mounts and adding new mounts. There was a ton of new Masteries that came with the Sky Scale. There were a ton of new Masteries that came with the Roller Beetle. There's actually a lot going on there. This season, are they doing mounts? Is it coupled to Path of Fire? Do Path of Fire mounts have big relevance for these maps? Do we see it in any of the footage? We don't get the answers to any of that. The presentation just did not go into any detail that really I thought they would. To what extent we consider this a Path of Fire saga? I don't know. But we do hear that the new Mastery chain is much like with the Aurene chain. Every episode we go a bit deeper into the same chain. This time it's to do with the Spirits of the Wild. Now I think that's a good choice. We're going to start apparently with Raven. and we learn a bit about their magics. There's a bit of footage of them interacting with some totems, but again, completely devoid of all details. One thing I will compliment the presentation for here is we are talking way off in the future now, all right? You'll notice we're talking about Episode 1 and Episode 2, and the prologue isn't even out yet. So I think the devs did appreciate that players would be wanting to look further off into the future. I just don't think they went far enough. Episode 2, and they're very, very loose with the details. While they're talking about Episode 2, everything is clearly extremely work in progress. I think the studio's been scrambling hardcore to get something to show since the layoffs earlier in the year. Maybe people don't appreciate that to the extent that they should. But, you know, it's hard to hear, oh, we're going to get something to do with Ravens, but we don't know much more than that. It's hard to get ramped behind that. They do confirm that Heart of Thorns Masteries and POF Masteries will be relevant. So I like this whole Heart of Thorns sale, so we get the bouncing mushrooms and so on. That was one of my favorite things that they do whenever a new release comes out, if we get previous Masteries being relevant. And now they can confidently do that in all future maps, because everyone that has POF also has Heart of Thorns, so you get the full collection. Don't forget as well that the main one I'm thinking about is Ancient Magics from Season 3, and particularly Coda's Flame. Coda's Flame's got to be a thing in this upcoming season, right, guys? Though they never mentioned that on the presentation. Some other little bits from the gameplay area. And let me note as well, nothing to do with mounts. No sense of a new mount, no footage of a new mount. You know, and we've got a couple of concepts that could have been good for, and we're still with Path of Fire, so you'd think maybe they'd go for it. But there's absolutely nothing in those terms. So, yeah, they talk about Episode 1 and 2 being tightly linked. It sounds like it's going to be a dry top style expanding map. They say there's a big tone difference in Episode 1 and 2 versus the prologue, specifically inspired by Lovecraftian horror and Cthulhu-style stuff. This is where I'm thinking Deep Sea Dragon might have some relevance and might be interesting. And they say specifically that they're going for a new dynamic approach, between episodes that they're excited to show us, but they don't nail it down. So here's one feature, one actual, real, tangible thing. Strike missions. So strike missions are a new format of open world content that will be coming in the upcoming saga. It's 10-man content to ease people into the highly choreographed content that hardcore raids are offering. So they know that people who are into raids love raids, but they also know that it's only a limited proportion of the Guild Wars 2 player base that's doing them. So I really like what ArenaNet's doing here. They're thinking, okay, we've got to get more people into raids, and then we can justify spending more time on raids. Perhaps, for example. We know that a ton of people just say raiding is not for me. And the biggest problem with raids, I've said it all the time, is the 10-man cap. 10-man was ridiculous and foolish to go to with Heart of Thorns, and now they're stuck with it. They have to deal with the 10-man cap. Now, Fractals can teach you about the game and can weed you into it, but Fractals doesn't quite help with the 10-man cap. It can get you like 4 friends, but can it get you 10? So this next season, they've got something called strike missions. So it sounds like these are going to be open world, public raid style bosses that you can publicly group for in the open world. I think, and this is me reading between the lines because the devs never gave us enough information, this is going to be a new iteration on the bounty setup. So bounties that we saw with Path of Fire, I think they'll take into the saga, and they're going to use the new bounty system, strike missions, to try and get people 10-man communities that they meet and become friends with in the open world, that then they can maybe take to the aerodrome. So that all sounds pretty good. They give us some concept of some of the enemies. They talk about how the enemies might change patch to patch, but there's nothing really tangible there. I will say they're new in lore, but I really can't say anything further. So yeah, that's strike missions. There's a little bit of a talk about PvP. Now, the community is really miffed about this PvP mention, and I don't think they should be. Obviously, people like to feel neglected. It's fun to feel like the victim. And if you're a PvPer in Guild Wars 2, then you are the ultimate victim. Okay, maybe you'll get down in the dirt and argue with a world versus worlder who the bigger victim is. But one guy in the audience cheered about PvP when it was mentioned, and the devs kind of acknowledged that there was one dude at the back. That to me wasn't offensive. That to me wasn't inappropriate. That to me was fine. And we did hear a little bit about PvP a little bit further here. So yeah, Swiss. We hear, though, now also that there's a new armor set coming. It doesn't look that good. But continual, weapon and armor sets for Ascended Shard Sinks, I think is brilliant, so I'm happy with that. But we do hear about a new feature, and that's mini-seasons. So they describe mini-seasons between conquests. If you guys don't play PvP much right now, basically you have a lot of really profitable, amazing incentive to play for the majority of the time. But when the season ends, you just sit about for 2 weeks and you don't play Guild Wars, and maybe you forget about PvP and you go to a different game in the meantime. It's not very healthy for the game. So they're introducing something new, mini-seasons, and they describe it as changing up activities between seasons. So it doesn't sound like it's going to be Conquest. It sounds like you'll do Conquest seasons, and then while Conquest is off, maybe it's Murderball. Maybe it's Dwayne's Duos. Maybe it's activities. Maybe there's a festival going on, and you're doing Aspect Arena, or you're doing Reaper's Rumble or whatever, or Snowball fights that are tuned up. And they actually have mini-seasons based on these. They're still PvP activities, but different rule sets. And this could be very good. There's a lot of people out there who think Conquest is the devil and Guild Wars 2 just needs to look at other game types. Well, we're about to see those mini-seasons. If the mini-seasons end up more successful than Conquest because people want deathmatch more or they want duos more, then it will be evident and they can just shuffle it around. But so I think that was actually really good, and it's going to be largely looked over because most people aren't paying enough attention to the PvP side of the game. So then those two devs leave, and that's it pretty much, guys. That's all the information from the presentation. You're caught up. That is my passing and my interpretation on all the most important stuff. That's it. Now, at this point, it's a 40-minute show, and we're maybe like half an hour in, so there should still be 10 minutes left. I want to bring your guys' attention back to the Path of Fire announcement. With Path of Fire, they did a quick, in-and-out, 20-minute show. They really cut to the details. They talked about massive, sweeping, epic changes for Guild Wars 2 and a ton of awesome new content in 20 minutes, and they left. For this event, they've given us, you know, the month roll-in. They gave us the big countdown. They hired a theater out, and they gave us double the time. This is a 40-minute show. So, you get this late in, they've talked vaguely about the saga and what's going on, but you know they've given all this extra time. Why have ArenaNet given all this extra time? Is it because they're going to talk to us about the next X-Pack or something minor, maybe something else going on in the studio? What have I got in it for me as a really long-term Guild Wars 2 player? That is what everyone is begging. That's what people are begging to know, and they've done 40 minutes, so surely they're spending that extra time on something great, right? So here's what they spend the rest of the time on. A repeat of the trailer we already saw, and merchandising. So, I have to say, I don't think I've been more disappointed in an ArenaNet announcement or production than I have ever been. Except this moment here on this stream, on this up. This was awful. So we'd had some very loose information that you could maybe have got by, like I say, on a blog post. And now they get a guy comes out on stage, and basically you're watching advertisements. I mean, I don't know whether it's like a more consumerist culture that enjoys this. The theater was ravenously applauding everything, but it was basically a whole section. All this extra time people thought might have meant something. It was just them on stage saying, hey, buy yoga trousers. Hey, buy meaningless little toys. Hey, buy just completely pointless stuff. There was one decent thing on the list. ArenaNet are coming up to their 20th anniversary, amazingly. ArenaNet 20th anniversary, apparently. And they are going to be selling, apparently you can pre-order it already, a Guild Wars 2 Art of Guild Wars 2 book that is the entire franchise. So back when Guild Wars 2 came out, there was an Art of Guild Wars 2 book that you got, I think, with the collector's edition of the game. Maybe there was a version sold separately. And it had all developer comments in it from devs of the time. Had amazing insights, like the fact that Tengu was going to be a playable race at launch, and then it got cut. Many of you may not have known that, but that's actually listed in the Art of Guild Wars 2 book. It's not just art. It's like a from the devs, behind the scene, almost like mini documentary that you can hold in your hands and read and have all this luscious art at the same time. There was a really, really, really good book. So they are doing a sequel to that. Now, that is pretty good, okay? There's a new version of it, a 20th version that they will be selling with more behind the scenes and developer comments and stuff. I'm actually interested in that. But they could have talked about that in maybe 20 seconds. That was the one product that might have meant something, or you could have justifiably talked about it. And what I very suddenly realized with a deep sinking feeling was they were just running the clock out now with trying to get more money, just trying to, it felt so desperate to me. I'm so disappointed to say. I felt so bad because it felt like, okay, they've put this theater show on. It probably cost them some money, you know, in terms of dev time and rehearsals and getting the theater and all this kind of stuff. And they're thinking to themselves, well, how can we make this not too expensive on our bottom line, I know, will turn a huge part of the show into a blatant advertisement and request for more money to keep the game afloat. That's how it felt. It may not have been that way, but it looked desperate, it looked tacky, and it was definitely of no value to any of the fans that were there. Worst of all, they left it to the end. So they even had like a segue. They were like, that's not all, we've got some other exciting stuff for you. And then they did this. Not a good look. And I have to say, it was then that I realized there wasn't going to be any real information about elite specializations or even confirmation that an elite specialization might be a thing that comes into Guild Wars 2. Or even confirmation that they have the money or time or resources or inclination to even think about expansions in the future. This, if anywhere they had to do that, they didn't need to give any details. No title, no date, no details. Just that they have vision. And they didn't do it. And I think the devs knew that they should have done that, and they didn't anyway. So I think that this is it, guys. I think it's Sagas, and I don't think that's going to sit well at all. I really hope for some interviews maybe from the devs coming up where they can settle the dust on this or maybe give people some comfort. I think it's really hard for them to sell this idea of Sagas when they're obviously clearly still so time crunched and struggling with the layoffs and everything. To do the big announcement seemed like a big gamble to me. And it didn't pay off. I will say, by the way, after the advertisements, they did pull a cutscene out of the upcoming episode and show it. And for lore geeks, it was a really good cutscene. Again, if you guys want me to do an analysis of it in a separate video, I will. It's not really relevant here, but you get to see the cutscene, and then they just replayed the trailer. That was it. That was the end of the show. That was all the hype. That was everything that was built up for. They spent twice the time to talk about way less than, you know, what the Path of Fire show was showing or the Heart of Thorns show was showing. And there you have it. So, let's take a bit of a step back here. You're ArenaNet and you've just done this. Now, the question is why? I do have some thoughts. First of all, they've been being pressured by the community, by us ourselves, to do better marketing for a long time. Consistently, we've always said Guild Wars 2 doesn't have good enough marketing. It flopped with its launch marketing, it flopped with its Season 1 marketing, it doesn't get out there, it doesn't do enough. So, if you remember, they had some new hires with the marketing, some new initiatives a while ago. I can very much imagine that some people came on super enthusiastic and they were like, yeah, let's do some big marketing. Even though we haven't got the content worth the marketing necessarily, it's time for us to start doing bigger stuff. So, if this show at this theater was just them starting something that they mean to go on with, I kind of understand it. So, like, if it's Sagas Forevermore, then they have to go big with it. They have to do the big theater thing. They have to push everything they possibly can. Maybe what the devs are doing is they're saying, all right, let's do these big events, right? And see how many new players that gets. See how many ripples we can cause in gaming media. See how much that actually helps us just for Living World. Maybe the reason the expansions themselves have bumped up our profits so much is just because we market them really hardcore. So why don't we just market Living World really hardcore? And let's see how it goes. And thus we get an event like this, all right? And maybe, guys, next year, this saga will close. The Icebrood saga will close out. And maybe it was awesome. And I actually think it will be awesome. I genuinely do think it will be awesome. Maybe not expansion level awesome, but I think it will be awesome. And after that, they might do another similar show, a 40-minute show talking about, you know, the Depth saga or the Cantha saga. Who knows, right? Well, if it's going to be a saga or an expansion. The devs might have also, they might be planning expansions and they might have just realized, look, it's going to be ages until we have some big thing, so let's just make a big thing out of this. Even though it's not that big, let's make as big a thing as we possibly can. Let's just go heavy with it and scramble and grab as much stuff as we can and throw it out there. So I can understand why this show ended up like that. And now everyone feels overhyped or let down. But I think that would go away the second time they did this, right? If next year we see a 40-minute announcement and they're on stage, that level of expectation missing isn't going to be there, is it? Because people are going to say, well, hold on, does everyone remember the Icebrood saga? All right, let's just take it for what it is. Let's see what this saga is like on stage. And we'll expect the blatant advertisements on stage that nobody wants to listen to and, you know, just feels very desperate. We'll accept that stuff because now there's a precedent for it. But this felt like a big misfire for now. And I just hope to see that the devs talk much more clearly and precisely about this stuff we're supposed to be excited about. And if they're not talking about expansions, they got to get on it quick. Give us real, tangible stuff on build templates. Because I really do think they're losing people's hearts, and fast, including mine. So there you have it, guys. Not great. I hope that Icebrood is good, and obviously very soon we'll have content and a map and things to run through, and I'll be covering it with you guys. But how do we feel about that gloomy, distant future? If sagas don't do it for you, I think people are going to start thinking it's time to put down Guild Wars 2. And that's not something ArenaNet wants people to think. Cheers, that's my recap for the presentation. That's honestly how I feel. Not great. And I'll see you for the next one very soon.